Okay, so we have a little bit technical difficulty, and we were just gonna get into Mr. Gao's life and how he went to the went to the Han School in Xinjiang, and we're I think you are about to talk about affirmative action. Am I right?
Oh well, yeah, affirmative action. Although we don't call it affirmative actions back in Xinjiang, but yeah, somehow that's the idea. So the first affirmative action I've mentioned previously was uh, I was, I was my own very existence was the result of the affirmative action in the first place, and then I think the affirmative next very important time point for me to actually enjoy the affirmative action and the benefits for the ethnic minority was in the Gaokao, the university intake exam.
Yeah. I'm gonna stop you for 1 second just to refresh
sure.
people's memory. When you say your very existence is thanks to affirmative action, you are actually talking about being an exception to China's one-child policy, right? Your mom is Mongol, so you already have an older sister, and because your mom is Mongol, your parents are allowed to have you as a second child.
Exactly. Yeah. So because my mother had my sister in Turpan, and 8 years after that, when they moved to Romchi and their living conditions improves, they think that we should have a second child, and hopefully it's a boy because they want both a daughter and a boy. And that was a privilege that only a few urban Chinese families can enjoy back to that time. So I became the second child of my family. So,
definitely. Definitely, because like I mentioned earlier, I was born a decade before in 1976 when the first one-child policy, which is first been rolled out. But in 80s, when you were born in 1986, Chinese government got really, they got really serious about implementing one-child policy, like throughout China, not just like in particular region. Because in 1976, I remember Chongqing is just one of the first city that implemented. Because I remember posting on Weibo talking about one-child policies. There are people like, what are you talking about? Back then, like in early 80s, our area haven't had the one-child policy yet. They don't realize back then China kind of rolled out policy kind of like one place, one at a time, and like Chongqing was one of the first place, and so by your time, that one-child policy even extended to Xinjiang Urumqi, right? And then for the Han family, for the Han family, because back in my time, in 1970s, I keep on talking about my time. In my time, I think Han family in Xinjiang would still be allowed to have 2 kids, but 1980s,
not afterwards.
Not 1980s.
Not 1980s. Yeah, exactly. So so that was the I think the full power, the time for the full power of the one-child policy. So I was able to, came to this world at that time. So that's the first benefits I think I received back to that time. So I think the next most important thing is about education. We have talked about Xinjiang's education system is basically a 2-track system: the Mandarin language teaching system and the ethnic minority language teaching system. You have you have the rights to choose either, but because it's always difficult for people to learn other language, so naturally.
I also want to point out, it's like you mentioned, it's Han education and ethnic minority education. So it's not just Han school and Uyghur school. There's actually Kazakh education. There's
Kazakh school, Mongolian school, and Kyrgyz school. As long as you speak your own language, you are entitled to receive the education with your own language.
Because I remember some people were showing the school for the Xibo people. The Xibo people in Xinjiang have their own curriculum in Xibo, which is very close to Manchu, right? And in fact, because because a lot of the the Manchu the Manchu people in China are losing their language because after 1640s all the Manchus moved from Manchuria to Beijing and rest of
My
China.
wife happens to be a Manchu.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Oh, because she's from Beijing, right?
She's local.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
her family stays in Beijing for about 400 years.
Yeah.
All the way goes back to the royal family in Qing dynasty, because I think she belongs to Xiang Baiqi, which is one of the.
So that's a border
tribes.
white banner. One of the 8 banners of the Manchu banners. Yeah, wow. I mean, people don't realize, but a lot of Lao Beijing, a lot of the old Beijing residents have Manchu roots, because that's when the Manchus came across the Great Wall. They like the whole of Manchuria was depopulated because everybody went to Beijing, went to live in Beijing, and and so your family is really like the real multicultural family. Your
Tell me about that.
Yeah, your grandma is Mongol and now your wife is Manchu.
Manchu, yeah. I mean, yes, they have lost their language long time ago. So yeah.
Well, yeah, they live in in Beijing for 400 years. So yeah, that happens. But the Shibo people who were moved by the Manchu Emperor from Heilongjiang,
from Dongbei.
Yeah, from northeast China all the way to Xinjiang, back in the 17th century, they preserved their language, and because PRC policy guarantee them the education in their own language. So like right now a lot of the Manchu youth who wanted to revive the Manchu language, they go to the Shibo people in Xinjiang.
Yeah, I heard of that.
Yeah, and they take their textbooks, the Shibo textbook, because the Shibo language is very similar to Manchu.
Very similar to Manchu.
Yeah. So for people don't realize how diverse Xinjiang is, I'm trying to give them a picture. There's like all different ethnic groups in Xinjiang, not just Han and Uyghur. So go ahead. Sorry, back to you. Back to your story.
No, that's a very good comments. I also reject the stereotype of Xinjiang and Xinjiang people as we see in today's Western media. It's either we were this or that. So it's really frustrating as a minority ethnic guy born in Xinjiang and growing up there to see that the very vivid and prosperous and happy lifestyles back in Xinjiang, multi-ethnicity lifestyles are kind of simplified into a stereotype and presented to the world in the bleak picture. That's very sad, and I'm deeply disturbed by that kind of propaganda. And
especially when your mother's side of the family have been in Xinjiang for 800 years, like the Mongols have been in northern Xinjiang longer than the Uyghurs be in northern Xinjiang. Because my understanding is the Uyghurs, they're traditionally live in southern part of Xinjiang.
Southern part of
Xinjiang.
That's correct.
Yeah, and then the northern Xinjiang is more like the nomad, the nomadic people, the Mongols, the Kazakhs, and so the Mongols have been in the region for a long time, like your side of the
for at least 800 years, as I recall, as the Genghis Khan and his descendants even just went all the way westernwards. So sometimes.
By the way, this is the first time I got a descendant of Genghis Khan come to my podcast. I just like to say that because I think I don't think many English language podcasts get to say that. So yeah.
I'm very proud. I was very proud when I was a child about my, especially on my mother's side, the family descendants on my mother's side. So it's quite interesting for me to study that history as well. So, sometimes when I was studying overseas, I was in New Zealand, Australia, and the United States for some time. So when I talk to people, and some of my Western people know something about Xinjiang and Tibet, and say, "Oh, you're from Xinjiang. Are you Uyghur?" They're asking the same question with my friends, Han Chinese friends in Neidi. So I think it's not so many people know about Xinjiang back to that time, back in the early 2000s. So I explained that I'm Mongolian. I said, "Oh, why are you Mongolian? And are Mongolian, historically lived in Xinjiang?" I mean, I was born in Urumqi, which is the capital of Xinjiang. Do you know what Urumqi means and what language is?
Yes,
it's Mongolian. It means beautiful pasture.
Yes, let's just set that straight. Because I see a lot of people making really stupid comments like, "Oh, why Urumqi they have all these there was one of these quote unquote Xinjiang scholar in the West. They're talking about somebody putting in Urumqi, they're putting up a Buddhist sculpture. They're saying, "Oh, look at these Chinese people. They're putting like a Buddhist symbols in the capital of the Uyghur homeland." I'm like, look, Xinjiang has been traditionally Buddhist.
Buddhism,
It was
the Uyghur people.
It was Buddhist
originally the Uyghur people were actually Buddhist. And then converted to Islam.
Xinjiang was Buddhist even before the arrival of Islam, and also the Mongols is traditionally Buddhist, and people don't realize, people just don't understand the diversity of Xinjiang. So thank you for setting the record straight. But let's back to your story before my interruption.
Yeah, sure. So as you know, the education is one of the most important things in Chinese life. And if you're ethnic minority people and you're receiving Han Chinese education, that education is also very important. It's basically decided how life will go and what kind of industry will go, line of industry will go, and what kind of living will have in the future. So one of the key points in this education system is the university intake exam. So I'm not very proud to say this, but I received 10 bonus points in my university intake exam because my mother, one side of my parents is ethnic minority people. So if you have both of your parents being ethnic minority, no matter what, for example, both of your parents can be Uyghur, both of your parents can be Mongolian, or one as Uyghur or the other as Mongolian. Doesn't matter as long as they're not Han and in Xinjiang. Both your parents are ethnic minority groups. You get 50 bonus points. What does that mean? The full university intake exam, the full points is 750. So if you can do 600, you're very good. You're exceptionally good. And if you can do 700, you can go to Tsinghua, which is the China's best engineering university. And if you can do 650 points, you can go to probably Beida if you're doing social sciences. So I've mentioned this also with Dan Cohen, that imagine that every year there's probably several millions of Chinese teenagers take the university examination. I think it's the average number in the past few years, about 10 million or something. So imagine a long queue of 10 million people. 50 points difference means that you can jump probably a quarter of a million people, something, and at least 100,000 people. So that's the differences with and without the bonus point as they receive that.
And the people, I think, because a lot of the people in US, they do go to colleges. They don't understand in China how important that college education is, because for a lot of people that's life-changing, right? It's like
it's life-changing
to get a
because as a developing country, the resource for education is in relative scarcity. So you have to decide which part of the country you need to build more universities or high quality universities. You have to concentrate the resources that the government can allocate into, for example, several or dozens of universities, particular universities, to make them very good. And you have the second tier university and third tier universities. And if you are facing 12 million kids, teenagers, want to go to the several or dozens of top universities in China, how do you decide who can go and who cannot? It's a equality, social equality issues. It's a very serious issues. So what the Chinese government did back
by the way, I just also want to make a comment about the Chinese educational advancement is solely based on test scores. So like not like US where it's as you mentioned, in US it's based on SAT scores, teacher's recommendation, your GPA, your personal essay, and your extracurricular activity. Like they look at all sides. But China, they only sole criteria for going to college is your college entrance exam. So that's why that exam is so important. That's like that's kind of like the goal for all the students when they go into the elementary school. They're preparing all their life for that taking that test, basically.
I mean, yes, exactly. I mean, it's unfair to many students because they have been doing very well, for example, for 10 years, for 12 years of their education from primary school to high school. But just because that one exam, they did not do very well, they lost the opportunity to receive high quality higher education, to go to top universities. I mean, that indeed is unfair, but that's the fact of Chinese education system, at least back in my times. Later on, especially in the 2010s, because the living standards and has keep rising, and Chinese people, especially in the urban and coastal area, become much more wealthier, so they can send their kids to universities overseas, to United States, to Western Europe, to Australia, to New Zealand, to these places, to Canada. And so they have more options than before. But back to my time in the 90s and early 2000s, that was pretty much the only option for you. So
one thing you mentioned earlier about in the Cultural Revolution era, how your dad, in order to change his life, he joined the army to leave the rural villages. But like in the 1970s and 1980s, the way to change your own circumstance, the best way is to get a high score in the college entrance exam and go to a good college. That is like a life-changing kind of event you can happen. You can go move higher in your social standing, your social class.
Upward social mobility. That's the only way to achieve that most of the time. True, that's true. So because during my parents' time, during the Cultural Revolution, the Gaokao, the university intake examination, was interrupted for many years and was resumed in 1977, I think. So after that, the people can, the students can go to college as before. So, but within a certain period of time, they couldn't have the options. So the only way for them to change their lives was to join the army, to become a worker in a publicly or state-owned factories, or so the choice was limited back to that. But things have changed greatly over the last 40 or 50 years. So the second life-changing moments for an ethnic guy back in Xinjiang was to participate in Gaokao, the university intake exam, and receive your bonus points. That's what I called. That's when you redeem your minority ethnic voucher, affirmative action voucher at that time. So I personally, benefit a lot from that, because without that 10 bonus points, again, I'm not very proud of that. Especially, it's unfair to my Han fellows who have worked very, very hard as I do, from all the way from primary schools to high schools.
Let me put on the other side. Let me put a caveat on that, because we all know, like in Chinese universities, they have quotas for each region. right? So Beijing and Shanghai, they have the largest quota reserved for the local students from Beijing and Shanghai. And these people from Beijing and Shanghai, they growing up, they get the best educational resources, right? We all know the schools in Beijing and Shanghai are the best, right? And
the quality of the education,
even me
true.
from Chongqing, I went to one of the top school in like the Sapinba district of Chongqing, but I can't even. Chongqing is education resources totally not comparable to the level of Beijing or Shanghai.
Well, it's way better than us.
Right? So it's not even equal even among like the Han students. If you're born into Beijing, Shanghai, you got a leg up already. And you from Xinjiang, like Xinjiang's educational resource does not compare to Beijing or Shanghai. Mm-hmm. So you know what? Take whatever you can get, man. I don't begrudge you. I think
I'm feeling much better.
Yeah. So think about that way. Take whatever you can get.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. I think you have pointed seriously. I think you have pointed one key aspect for this affirmative action policy because of the inequality of education and other socioeconomic resources allocation across regions in China, all the way, it's all the way rooted in the planned economy era. So one of the most effective ways to close the gaps due to this inequality is to award the ethnic minority groups in regions like Xinjiang and Tibet bonus points to empower them, to let them somehow comparable to their Han, counterparts. So I think that's the logic behind this education benefits for ethnic minority people in China and back to my time. So I personally benefited a lot from that policy, and I was able to went to one of the top Chinese law schools, universities in Beijing, and gradually after I graduated from that university, I was recommended by the university to study overseas in the joint master scholarship program. And afterwards, I was able to do PhD in international political economy in New Zealand. And I was able to travel in the Western countries like Australia and the United States and do some joint programs.
I don't think you need to apologize for taking those extra points on the college entrance exam.
I worked hard enough.
You are a smart cookie. The real problem, in China that need to address is kind of the inequality in the distribution of educational resources, right? To kind of spread that more around. But yeah, we know you are very highly intelligent and eloquent person. That's why I'm having you on the podcast to talk about this very, very difficult and very complex issue, right, in Xinjiang. And so when you grew up, so when I was growing up in Xinjiang, again, I'm going back in the 80s. I remember from what I know, from what I talk to people, people all agree in Xinjiang in 1980s, the ethnic relationship is pretty good, between the Han, Uyghur or Han, different ethnic group. Back in 1980s, almost everybody agreed was pretty good, right? But then something changed, like in the 1990s, and leading up to 2000. And that's the era where you were born into. So maybe can you tell us what happened?
Okay. Very interesting question, because that's something I observed as as a child back in Xinjiang and as a teenager later. And when I look back those experience of my childhood and my teenager, I realized that something was indeed happening back in Xinjiang, which largely caused the situation later as we witness today. So. One of the things I think should be partially responsible for today's situation was this two-track education system of Han education, Mandarin education and ethnic minority language education. And I think previously, the Chinese government was thinking that, well, you have the right to receive your own education in your own language. But gradually, if you receive your education in your own language long enough, it becomes, how do I say, entrenched itself. It becomes more and more different, these two education systems. The Han Chinese system can follow up, education system can follow up the latest development globally and the latest development of China's coastal area. But the ethnic minority education system are more and more focused on the ethnic identity themselves and to highlight their the specialness of their ethnic identity. That's what we observed back in the 1890s and early 2000s. Although I was only a teenager and kid, we realized that we don't talk to each other as a different ethnic minority groups too much, because many of the ethnic minority kids, actually, like myself, go to Han schools. So in every classes from primary school, middle school, high school, we have about around 10 to 15% of ethnic minority kids in that class. So including Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and Kyrgyz, and of course, Mongolians myself. But when I talk to them, for example, when I talk to my Uyghur friends in schools, they have brothers and sisters or cousins went to the ethnic schools, Uyghur language schools. And when they talk to each other, they found that the textbook they use is different. And the content is not only the language, the content is different as well. Sometimes when we talk about it, well, it's really interesting. The things we learned are more and more increasingly different. That was my impression back to that time. And because I was only a teenager, I didn't know what it means. And if you check out the CGTN's China's anti-terrorism documentary released about 2 weeks ago, the first one, you know, the problem was already actually inside the education system, the two-track education system. The Islamic fundamentalism, terrorism, I'm not sure about terrorism, but some fundamentalism and separatism has already somehow infiltrated in this two-track education system into the ethnic minority language education. And that was reviewed on the fourth documentary released by CGTN. And you can call it propaganda as you want, if you're a Western, audience or people. But the evidence I saw in the documentary all confirmed what I observed back to that time. So there's serious problems in this two-track education system, which is deprive the rights of the ethnic minority people. Actually, it did not intend to do this, but the real effects was this: deprive the opportunities for the ethnic minority peoples, including Uyghurs, to receive Han Chinese language education, and to, to stop them to access to the wider Chinese market and the wider Chinese economic development.
I have some observation. You correct me if I'm wrong, right? So my understanding is back in the 80s, even though there's dual track education system, there's a Mandarin education and there's like different ethnicity, their own language education. It didn't matter as much because back then, Xinjiang is still under socialist planned economy, right? Like you graduate school, Chinese government will assign you a job. So that doesn't really matter, what you learn, right? You're guaranteed a job. But then in 1990s, when finally when the opening and reform started to get propagated to Xinjiang, the market economy gets introduced. And then it makes a huge difference whether you have the Mandarin skills or not, because if you have connections with inland China, with the other part of China, if you can source goods from like the coastal factories, if you have can communicate with people to directly interact with people from another part of China, that gives you a huge advantage versus people who were only being educated in Uyghur, whose primary language is Uyghur, and don't know Mandarin. Because I saw I mentioned in previously in our talk that I saw a different documentary about people from Xinjiang. It's called 我从新疆来, I came from Xinjiang, which interview a different Xinjiang people who and there was a case was like there's a college educated Uyghur man who has been educated in the Uyghur only education system all the way through college, and he was working in Beijing, but he does not speak Mandarin at all. Like so that's
the restaurant.
Yeah, so only option he has, only kind of economic opportunity he has is working in the Uyghur restaurant because he cannot speak Mandarin, and I think that kind of clicked with me. I was realized, oh yeah, like of course, this dual track system. If you're educated, if you went to the so-called Han school and get a Mandarin education, and you can connect and interact with the rest of China, of that in a market economy, when the state no longer controls every aspect of the economic life, you suddenly have a huge leg up over the people who don't speak Mandarin. I think that's a big problem in Xinjiang, and I think Chinese government recognized that. That's why in more recent years they're trying to introduce bilingual education, right? Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. I think it's a very good point to develop. I think it's a very good point to develop with further, because two things that people, especially in the West, were always misunderstood is that first, the Han Chinese education, the bilingual education, is an action of cultural genocide. You understand? To trying to eradicate its own cultures. That's the first misunderstood, or first or intended, intentionally misunderstanding. The second one is that the government organized or government initiated cross-region labor transfer is forced labor. That's the second misunderstanding or second propaganda.
It's not misunderstanding, it's propaganda, because
yeah.
people can go look up an NPR article back in 2009, right after the Urumqi riot. They went to interview the Uyghur workers in Guangdong province, part of this labor program transfer. And in those article, I'm going to pull it up, I'm going to find the link and then share with everybody. They said these Uyghur workers came because it offer higher wages, because these coastal factories offer higher wages, and they find better working conditions there. And that was before U.S. went all hell bent on starting a Cold War against China. Now they're saying that's slavery. That's all propaganda. I mean, that's bullshit. Let's just put it out there. So okay, sorry, I'm done venting. Go ahead, back to you.
Okay, cool. So there's 2 points, because that so many Uyghurs and other ethnic minority people cannot receive Han education and they cannot speak Han Chinese, so which they're pretty much denied from access to more resources, as you talk about, and to more higher paid job opportunities, good job opportunities. So how to resolve this issue? It's a big problem or challenge for Chinese local government, especially in Xinjiang. So on one hand, they did not receive the Han Chinese education or bilingual education back to their times at their schools. On the other hand, we must let them to enjoy the results, or to let them have a bigger slice of pie of Chinese economic development. How to balance this issue? So they think of 2 ways. The first one is to introduce bilingual education, even though they have already left the school and as adults. Second, why not the government organize the ethnic minority people to the coastal area to collectively, as a group, to work, for the factories, there, and for the higher paid jobs, factories there, So that will resolve the language issue because they work as a group. They don't need to individually communicate with their Han colleagues or counterparts or something on their works. So, but they can receive the higher pay as to do farming in Nanjiang, in southern part of Xinjiang, which you can practically do nothing all year round because of lack of water or something on harsh natural conditions.
I was actually pretty shocked when I was doing research on Xinjiang. It says like even until very recent years, more than 80% of the Uyghurs in southern Xinjiang were still primarily engaged in agriculture and in like subsistence agriculture. And these are very like people don't know, if people who don't know Xinjiang, most of the Uyghur live in southern Xinjiang, south of the Tianshan Mountains, and the place they live are these oasis towns on the edge of the Taklamakan Desert, which is the world's second largest moving sand desert. And these oasis towns are being fed by the glacial runoff from the Tianshan Mountain. So the water is limited. The arable land is limited. And there were about 3 million Uyghur in 1949 when the People's Republic was established, right? And now there's 12 million Uyghurs in Xinjiang. So the Uyghur population quadrupled, but most of the Uyghurs still live in these very confined oasis city areas, engaging in agriculture. Like the land is limited, but now the population just quadrupled, right? So this has created a lot of problem with unemployment and underemployment, right? So all these Uyghur youth, they are working part-time on the farm, but really there's not that much work because there's only so much farm because there's only so much water. So that's one of the problems the Chinese government program is trying to address, is trying to bring this surplus Uyghur laborers to the coastal Chinese factories. And because these young Uyghur men and women, they don't have the language skills, as you mentioned, they need to be organized. It's not like the labor migration in other parts of China where because some young teenager or some 20-year-old men, women from Sichuan, they can just go to Shenzhen on their own, right? They can just go to Shenzhen.
Spontaneous migration, labor migration.
Yeah.
So because we have this language barrier, and most of the Uyghurs are Muslim, they have this special Muslim food and living style requirements. So the government has to do something to organize, make the labor migration organized.
Yeah, and also another point is under the market economy. If the government doesn't do anything, if it's up to the private companies, they will always hire Han labor because there will be no language issue. Han Chinese will speak Mandarin Chinese, and two, because they don't have to provide halal meal, right? Because that's an extra overhead for in terms of, that's how people think, like running business and think about bottom line. Like why do I have to spend extra money to provide halal
to minimum the costs?
Yeah,
and maximum the benefits, interest.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's if you like the companies to choose, they always choose Han workers over Uyghur workers, of course. So that's why the government want to intervene and says, no, we ask you to employ Uyghur workers because they also need good jobs. They also need higher pay jobs than they do in farms in harsh natural conditions in southern Xinjiang. So this is basically distorted and skewed as forced labor. Okay, cool.
Well, I mean, I read the Adrian Zen's report. His